Hi, so thanks so much for joining us in Studio 1 of Abbey Road, which is super exciting to be able to say. We are here, as Tommy just explained, to talk about mental health and why it matters. And I'm going to say before we get going, that obviously we're going to talk about some difficult subjects, so you guys just look after yourself however makes most sense to you. And that is a small piece of housekeeping that's over, and I get to introduce three amazing speakers who I'm so excited to be joined by. So first of all, Stephen Manderson, you might know him as Professor Green, is a multi-platinum award-winning musician, a Times best-selling author, a presenter, and a documentary maker whose film Suicide and Me really shifted the mental health conversation and has made him a pivotal voice within that movement. And Hussain Manawer is also a best-selling author, a globally acclaimed poet, someone who is now on the national curriculum, which is amazing, and is a campaigner who has collaborated with basically everyone, from Oprah to Prince Harry to David Beckham. And last but not least, Jordan Stevens is a writer, actor, performer, true multi-hyphenate, one half of the newly reformed Rizzle Kicks, which is very exciting. Come on. And a mental health campaigner whose campaign I Am Whole went all the way to Parliament and has just published his first non-fiction book, which we'll get on to. You guys know each other, I think, but is this the first time that you've all been on a panel together?
At some point or another, both of these guys have been in my kitchen.
Okay, it's a little bit different. A little bit different to Abbey Road.
Well, no, actually, we were doing a mental health podcast. We were actually just going mental. Yeah.
Much of the work we've been trying to undo occurred in Professor Green's time.
Okay, so moving on.
But Hussain and I actually, we did, for I Am Whole, we did Music for Mental Health, which was a show at the Roundhouse. And Hussain, actually, I'm just realising this as I'm saying it, Hussain, relative to his stardom now, was on his way up. He was grinding away, but I was, through an ex, I was aware of his work, and I remember saying to the team, like, you've got to get this Hussain guy to perform at the event. And there was, I think Ed Sheeran played, Anne-Marie Pro, who else played on there? Can you remember? Oh, James Arthur. Anyway. He said that's when him and James Arthur made up. Anyway.
It wasn't on the mic for a reason.
No, but James he's cool. Hey, listen, it's all about openness and honesty, Stephen.
Snitch.
Anyway, my point is, Hussain, I remember vividly, stood up on that stage and just was unbelievable. And it was filmed, and he captivated the entire audience. You could hear a pin drop in that room, full Roundhouse.
Yeah.
And yeah, man, just incredible.
Thank you, man. That's nice of you. And I'm a fan of both of you. Like, and you.
We just met, but that's all right, don't worry. He just asked me how to pronounce my name, so.
Your jumper's hard, you know. I love that. No, I'm a fan of both of you, and Professor Green, your music has saved my life so many times, man. I don't think I've ever said that to you, but, like, honestly, your music...
I'm getting better at taking compliments, thank you.
No, your music has saved my life so many times, man, and I'm sure many other people in this room, so thank you. And Jordan, man, like you said, you put me on a stage where, I didn't think my voice was ever going to reach, man, and being here with both of you, this is really special.
But it seems small now, that stage, now, yeah. Oprah and that, yeah? Cool.
I'm trying to be like you.
Well, let me start with...
Can I say one more thing, though?
Please.
Sorry, I don't mean to...
No,
it's just that also I have to give credit to Stephen, because he did also take Rizzle Kicks on our first ever tour.
Oh, really?
It might have been completely trash and hellish and chaotic. But it was a career-defining moment for us. And Stephen requested that, and you also did used to chat to me on Facebook, but that's another. You're just encouraging me as a rapper.
Do you reckon you lot will take me on tour?
Nah.
Lucky it was an act of altruism.
I'm joking. No, we don't even know about that yet. But yeah. So just big up from that. Yeah, I'm with you, Hussain, in that love for early Professor Green and Professor Green now. You know.
Well, speaking of early Professor Green, Stephen, I was trying to find the first piece of media or interview that you did where you spoke openly about your mental health, and I might be wrong on this, I found one from 2014. It might have been earlier, but that's a decade ago. And do you remember, was there a specific moment that you decided, yeah, this is something that I'm going to talk about, or was it a gradual process?
No, it was ahead of that, and it was really naive. I wrote a song about my father's suicide, but quite specifically about something that his widow did afterwards by way of going to a newspaper and selling the story, hence read all about it. And that became my most successful single to date. It still is now. And every time I walked into a room and had to speak about that song, I was discussing probably the most traumatic thing that had happened to me in my life at that point. And it was a really valuable lesson because two things were happening, I guess. One was I was opening the floor to that conversation, which I wasn't ready to have myself, but I was having it unbeknownst to me at the time. And then the second thing that was happening was I was learning a really valuable lesson in that the more I spoke about it, and it wasn't about being disingenuous, but I never had to connect with the feelings that were attached to what happened. It's always going to be sad. There's always going to be a day when I can't talk about it without feeling those things. But it just taught me that the more prominent something is, the less power it has over you. Whereas there was a point where, like, I remember, and I said this in the documentary, which I think I made in 2013, I went to my nan's with my then wife, and we were looking through photos, and there's only like 3 photos of me and my dad, ever. And one of them popped out, and I hadn't seen his face in literally years. And I just had to take myself out of the room because I burst into tears, you know? But not to say I still don't get sad. There's many times, especially now I have a kid, that those feelings come up in a very different way. And again, I'm having to deal with the exact same thing, but from a different perspective and with different understanding and with growth, ultimately. But yeah, that was the beginning of that journey. And I guess it started way before that when my dad took his own life, but never did I think that, and it's bittersweet because for every life I've helped with the work that I've done, and mine included, that, you know, my life has changed because of this stuff. You know, I would still have my dad if he hadn't killed himself, which would leave me in a different situation and would have stopped me from helping all the people I've helped. But, you know, selfishly, I would rather have had that.
Of course. And what was that process for you? You know, watching that documentary, specifically going out into the world and seeing other people react to it. How was that for you? So
terribly bittersweet.
Yeah.
Before that, I'd done a radio documentary for Radio 1 with a suicide survivor and a doctor, Dr. Aaron Ballick. And the response was like nothing I'd ever really seen, not for my music, not for a campaign, not for anything. And it was so fucking bittersweet because you're just like, I almost don't want this to be successful. I don't want this to appeal to people because it's only appealing to people who are suffering or have seen someone else suffer, and, you know, by way of their suffering are suffering. And it's weird, even doing this, like, I'd rather not have to have these conversations. It's really weird continuously striving to do work that you wish you didn't have to fucking do.
Yeah. I mean, Hussain, your book came out, your debut collection, Life is Sad and Beautiful, came out in 2022. And that is a book which came from your own grief and your own experiences of depression following the death of your mum. Is there anything that Stephen's saying there that kind of chimed with you and your decision to put that into the world and how that process happened?
Man, I love you, Stephen, man. Honestly, I feel like I just need to have a moment because we have to honour everything you just said, and I feel like everyone in the room can feel your heart, man. I think when, like I said at the start, his music saved my life. So when I heard him talk about certain things, it allowed me to talk about it. And being Pakistani, coming from Ilford, and when my mum passed, it was very sudden, it was very quick. It was like she had a brain aneurysm one evening and she passed away. There was no warning. She wasn't ill. She'd never gone to the doctors. So I was like, oh, I don't know what life is like with no mum left. This didn't exist 5 seconds ago. So now all of a sudden it exists. And then it was poetry that helped me. And I never thought this poetry would go further than me or my friends that I would share it with. But I slowly found the confidence to start putting it out. And then hearing what you're saying is really interesting because it's tough. Like sometimes when people say to me, "Oh, there's a poem," I like one of your poems. I get really excited. They're like, "Yeah, page," and I'm like, "Oh, fuck's sake," because I know what's on that page, and that page is a deep page. So now I don't feel like I can say to you, "Thank you," because I shouldn't be thanking you for liking what you liked. But I think spaces like this and conversations like this helps people, and there's people in my life I wish I could help, but I can't. But hopefully we can all help someone else, and that will help someone else, and then it will hopefully go back round.
I mean, the difference, or one of the differences between that collection and your collection which came out this year is that I wanted to quick to is, well, you described it as a compilation album. So it's collaborative, it's an anthology.
Yeah.
And I mean, looking at the contents, we spoke about this, didn't we? But you've got everyone in there. There's Larry Lamb, there's
Uncle
Courtney
Larry.
Cox, there's Glenn Powell, but then there's also Jordan's in there, Misha B. But there's also people that you know from your life, people who aren't famous, and it's kind of a collection of poems, beautiful messages, essays, conversations.
Yeah.
Why was it important for you for that to be a collaborative project?
That book happened as like an accident, but I think when I've performed and I meet people and then they then tell me their story, I feel a bit selfish, thinking, how can I be the only one that's going to hear this? Like Nia, who's in chapter 1, has a water allergy. She writes about being medically gaslit for 18 years. She's allergic to the rain, shower. When I'm hearing this, I'm like, I need to do something with this. So putting that book together was important. And I also wanted a book that was like as diverse as my school register growing up, because I never could find a book like that. And so putting it together was really emotional and cathartic, I think the word is.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Larry Lamb, and that's another really important person in my life. I'm very much based off my emotion. So when I saw Larry, I was performing somewhere and I saw Larry in the audience, and I was like, fucking hell, Archie Mitchell. And afterwards, I literally followed him to the car. I was just like, I was so shook to approach him. And I was like, and then my mate was like, just do it.
He might have felt a bit better if you'd have done it before he got to the car.
I know.
I'm picturing a really dark night and him thinking he's about to get robbed.
I was moving mad. I was like, Larry! And then he turned around and went, what? And I said, he said, that was really good. And I said to him, how do I be your friend?
What a question.
And he went, take my number. And I was like, I took out that one and I took his number. And then I got in the car and he rang me. I thought he pocket dialed me, but he didn't. And he was like, yeah, I thought that poem was really... And he just started talking. And then from there I said, you know what? You're Uncle Larry. I can't call you Larry Lamb. That's offensive. You're Uncle Larry. And again, it's about having men in my life that I can actually talk about how I'm feeling to. I'm very sensitive, and it's nice to be able to speak about it where people don't tell you, oh, grow up or man up or any of them things. And I think that's what we've three always had in common with each other. Like, we'd never met, but I'm in Stephen's house in his kitchen, opening up, pouring out my heart on the kitchen table. First time we meet. And so yeah, I think it's important to just follow your heart.
I mean, speaking of pouring out your heart, Jordan, your new book, Avoidance, Heartbreak, I've done it wrong. I knew I was going to do this. I practiced it so many times as well. Avoidance, Drugs, Heartbreak, and Dogs. Amazingly titled. Hard to remember. It is a compulsively honest book.
Compulsively, yeah.
But it's an amazing read. It's
Thanks.
brutal and it's really raw. But I wonder for you how you got to that place of being able to write something like that and how you ended up feeling comfortable enough to put that out into the world.
Well, thank you for also using the word brutal. I've heard that a lot. And,
Sorry.
It freaks me out, but I think it is true because I think the process, the experiences, and then I wanted to create that kind of tense feeling because ultimately I went through a pretty epic heartbreak relative to my experience. And at the time, I didn't feel as though there was much on offer. I'm sure there are things I've missed that have been read in plays or whatever else, but I think especially through a heteronormative lens, my point of view, I hadn't seen a complete dissection of emotion in that way. So I thought it would best that I give it a go as a service to people like me. Not just specifically young men, but I guess most applicable to young men who perhaps lack guidance or understanding that the emotional world is one that we must have a balanced relationship with. It's not optional, it's necessary. And when I hear these two wonderful men speak about grief, it reminds me that, in fact, the opening quote is funny because when I was writing the book, in the proof, there was this little page at the start that said TDK, and I had to ask my editor, like, what the fuck does that mean? And they're like, oh, you need to put a quote here. Well, you don't have to, but you could do.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, what quote can I do? And the only quote I could think of was like once I was in an Uber, and the Uber driver, I can't remember the context of it, but he turned around to me and he said, there's only two things promised in life, change and death. And I was like, all right, keep your eyes on the road. No, but in all seriousness, he must have heard me on the phone or something like that, but he just had this profound statement and it's always stayed with me. And Stephen made the point that it's uncomfortable, having to have these conversations, or people wanting these conversations, but grief, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, is, death is promised and it's heartbreaking and the world is fucking tragic and we suffer, but it connects all of us. And in the book, I don't mention Rizzle Kicks one time. I don't mention, I don't, is that funny? I've actually missed the context of that.
What's funny about that, bloke?
No, I mean it. I don't mention anything about like my material existence because I didn't think it was important. I laid the context for it being that I had time and money. But ultimately, my experience of heartbreak was like quite an epic grief that I didn't think separated me from anybody on the planet. Like everybody is going to lose someone, lose something. And the more we understand about that experience, the more it will bring us together. That vulnerability breeds connection. It's the only time I've felt connected to a person as if they've opened up.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. Don't you think it's weird how there's this thing that's going to happen to all of us, and our immediate response to it, because of the severity of not being able to comprehend nothingness, which is potentially, depending on your beliefs, what death is, instead of embracing life because you're going to die, you just want to avoid the fact that you're going to die, and you do stupid shit that probably brings you potentially quite a lot closer to it. The fuck?
Yeah.
Let's avoid connection. Let's just practice deflection and avoidance because we're all going to die. But wait, surely that should make us want to embrace this all the more, and the only way to really embrace this is by way of connection.
Yeah, and I also have to give a shout out to my current girlfriend who, the relationship I'm in now, I feel secure and safe. I feel love, and I feel connected to a person. And I didn't have the words. I didn't have an understanding that I could feel love like this. I didn't know I could feel something that is hard to explain. So I said to her throughout the whole process, which would have been tough for her because I was writing about a past relationship. I said, the only reason I can write this is because I feel so safe with you. And I want everyone to know, especially young men and men, that they can feel safe and loved, and it's a lovely place to be in.
I mean, you mention young men there, and I think in all of your work, you've spoken about the importance of men speaking up and breaking down the stigma of men talking about mental health. And I wonder, over the past, you've all worked in this space for a really long time. What have you seen change when it comes to that conversation, or have you seen change?
Young men in love, is that what you said?
Yeah, so I suppose specifically how able men in your lives are to talk about their experiences, but also, when it comes to the way that we talk about mental health, we talk specifically about masculinity and emotions and anger and not needing to feel like you're holding up the world. And you mentioned like man up, all these kinds of things. Have you seen that dial move?
Yes, yeah, totally. I think it's a pendulum swinging, and there have been movements that have created, I mean, look, if we're talking about feminism, feminism's made incredible progress in terms of I believe anyway, and from what I've seen in terms of the books that have been written, the constant critique and development of the female experience. Most of my inspiration in terms of even analysing gender has come from bell hooks. So, and you know, I think it's especially in the Western metropolitan society delivered this self-confidence and ability to self-love or at least have access to a community that encourages the love of self. I think men have some way to go in terms of creating those communities within our space where we encourage connection to self and to others. But I definitely think there is more good going on in the world of men than perhaps we are led to believe. I look around me and see men who are brave and strong enough to break generational cycles all the time. The issue I find at the moment is that these wonderful men have no desire to be on YouTube and TikTok every fucking day of their lives. So, unfortunately, the men that we're shown and fed that do have the time to be on YouTube and TikTok every fucking day of their lives are horrendous.
Literally the worst example of what it is to be a human, not just man.
Be a human. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to drag these unwilling men out of the comfort of their loving relationships and be like, start a fucking podcast, because everyone who is starting one is talking shite.
I think to add to that as well, I've seen a lot of changes, in particularly with the men in my life telling each other that they love each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, that wouldn't happen. And even if it's done from emojis, I think emojis have saved more lives than we know, because do you know what I'm saying? You can just drop that love heart or the prayer hand symbol. That prayer hand symbol.
Where do you sit on the thumbs up emoji? Because Gen Z apparently hate it, but I'm quite into it.
What, the thumbs up? Yeah, I don't mind it. I don't mind it. The prayer hand is my go-to though. Whenever I've fucked up, I send the prayer hand. That saves me. That one saves me. But I think, I've seen the change. And maybe next year we should all have a conversation about grieving people that are still alive. Because I feel like I was crying the other day, and I said to my friend, and I think this is the problem when you're friends with writers, everyone's always got something to say. So you can't have a breakdown in peace, because they will drop some bars and it will make sense. So I was crying to my friend the other day, and I said, "Oh, I'm crying like someone died, man." She's like, "Yeah, someone did." I said, "Who?" She said, "Your old self." So I'm saying, I was like, I'm there clicking and crying at the same time. Now I'm healed. But I think it's a big conversation in grieving people and things and a part of our life that didn't exist anymore. We often talk about grief and people that are not here. But I think we've seen a big shift with regards to, and if you asked me a few years ago, I would have said, we've seen a shift in certain communities, but not in all communities. But now I think we're seeing it more. So we just got to keep going.
I think there's something really interesting in what you said about grieving people that are still with us, because that can happen in so many ways. Be it the loss of a friendship, which can always come back round. You can always meet another incarnation of someone that you've fallen out with.
I hope it comes back.
But then also, I've got a 3.5-year-old son, and I was saying that very thing to someone the other day, like, I have to grieve my son over and over again because each incarnation with him brings new things, but it lets go of things. Like, he used to say "downstairs" instead of "downstairs," and then one day he woke up and he just said "downstairs," and I was like,
so sweet.
Seriously, like, he's never going to say "downstairs" again. He still calls ketchup checkup, and obviously I hear those two words and get PTSD, but... one other thing, side note, just on the man up thing, I think man up's okay as long as it's used in the correct context, because I think we all need to man up and woman up at points. I think they can be very valid pieces of advice and necessary things to hear. I think the problem arises when a man, if we're saying man up, given it's a man in the body of the person who's saying man up, they don't have the sensitivity to address a person in front of them who might not need to hear that and may need to hear something other than that, because they don't have the toolbox or the toolkit to be in that situation and provide a useful piece of advice, or be able to offer them the space to be something other than what they deem to be a man, because that's all they know.
I'm interested that you say that, actually, because I was going to ask you, because Hussain, you've spoken about this as well, like the balance between vulnerability and resilience. and how resilience is a really big part of the conversation around mental health. And I don't know if, Jordan, you want to chime in on that as well, but do you know how do you balance those two things, the kind of difficulty of like asking for help, and also sometimes it's about you?
Yeah, you know, going back to Uncle Larry, yeah. So he's experienced life enough to know when I need him there for like a hug, but then he's also experienced life enough to know to tell me to grow up. And it's so powerful when he says that to me. I'll be like, Larry, this happened. He'll be like, yeah. And he'll wait for me to finish talking. Grow up! And I'm like, you know what? You're actually right. But I'll listen to you because you also hear me when I'm down.
Yeah.
And like, you know I can get through this one. So when I hear that grow up is said with so much compassion, I think certain people in your life have to qualify to talk to you like that. Yeah. They got to earn their badges before they can start coming in with
like
that.
They have to have lived enough life to qualify for that, and also just to have enough understanding of you. Because ultimately, I guess what they're saying when they say grow up or man up is find the strength within yourself to overcome this, but perhaps they don't have the vocabulary to say that. And some might say that's semantics, but it isn't for someone that's in the position of being on their knees crying in desperate need of something and doesn't feel like they have the strength. Just being told to get over it is not the easiest thing in the world. The more I learn about people developing relationships, you know, there's now new generations of boys and girls who have totally different perspectives on life, and we're battling the traumas of the older generations, etc. I just think about, ultimately, we have these hearts, and as I've got older, I can now feel when my heart is open and when it's closed. And I think often we're caught talking about the extremities of when those experiences go too far. I would never recommend somebody keep their heart closed for a long time, because it's isolating. And I think that's where we create some of the most more damaging behaviors will come from people who have been so traumatized or experienced such a significant heartbreak, perhaps at such a young age, that their heart is closed. And you can't connect to people like that. And so you're able to act in unempathetic ways. In the flip side, there are people who keep their heart too open. I really believe that too. That they allow everything in, and they're unable to cope because it's our responsibility to hold boundaries, you know. If someone to be boundaryless, they enter into spaces where they can be moved and swayed, and it becomes overwhelming. So every single human being, regardless of gender, I mean, I would even go as far as to call these different mechanisms masculinity and femininity, but that's more of a subjective conversation. But it's our responsibility to practice opening and closing our hearts as we engage with the world. And it sounds maybe a little bit airy because our concept of heart might be subjective, but it really is true. And I know the feeling. I know the feeling of where my heart is when I'm around certain people and when I'm not. You know, and the boundaries was a big lesson for me, you know, knowing when just to shut the door slightly. Sometimes you don't want to have that in your personal situation, you know. Mm-hmm. So everybody has a responsibility to balance those two energies. And I think sometimes gender can be quite a reductive way of looking at that experience.
I'm interested that you mentioned boundaries, because something that I've been thinking about a lot is, well, boundaries, but also the kind of the rise of people talking about self-help. Yeah. And whether there's a kind of midway point somewhere in there where it's not prioritizing the individual but is also collective at the same time as looking after yourself, and how you find that mid-ground of whether the kind of self-care, self-help conversation has gone a little bit too down one route to thinking about individualism too much.
Yeah, I definitely think, largely speaking, that society is hinged too much on individualism, for sure. We're encouraged, again, to isolate ourselves because I guess we're more susceptible then to being, you know. But it's a tough one when you say that. 'Cause, yeah, I think self-help is a massive... It's
so important, I should say.
No, it is.
So important.
It is, but I feel as though we do have a responsibility to balance ourselves and to act in ways that are beneficial to us. But we also do in an equal amount, have a service to our community. And I think community is one thing that has been actively attacked in recent times by either government or just our outlook on existence because of capitalism and etc.
I think there's so much said now by people who apparently know what's best for you. I think we need to change the narrative a little, and I think it should be more led by you know what's best for you, or you can, given the chance and the right education. I think to be selfish is okay if it's not at the detriment of others, which this I think lends itself to what you were talking about, but it's also okay to be selfless as long as it's not at the detriment of yourself.
Yeah. I think that where I also end up kind of thinking about that is the difference between, I suppose, talk and action, and whether, as a society, I think we've got really good about talking about mental health, not where we need to be, but better than where we were. But then, are we putting the things in place for, and that's over to you.
Do you know what this is, you know, I was saying about having conversations over and over, and I try and bring this up in every conversation because it's something that, it's almost a note to self. It's awareness, then understanding, then actioning. And we never quite get to the actioning bit. And it's all right to have a bit of time to play catch up. I was talking about things 10 years ago that I thought I understood, but I couldn't action and never, you know, let play a part in my life at that point, because although I understood it up here, I wasn't ready to put it into play. And so my life still suffered despite being able to talk about something. So I think a period of catch-up's okay, but I do think there is a real necessity to put things in place and action things that could support people. I think sadly when it comes to mental health, when we look at people who have suffered, perhaps they aren't with us anymore, we wait until it gets to its most extreme state to wish we could have done something, when in that moment, largely, you're never going to be able to. So you need to not let it get to that point. We need stuff in place to stop people ever getting to that point, because once it's there, people make decisions in isolation. You speak a lot about isolation and how negative it can be, and I agree. You're on your own with no one to validate or invalidate your thoughts or feelings, and that's a really scary place to be.
I think, sorry, but were you going to say? I just imagine you going to...
No, you're good.
You imagined.
I'm feeling all of it.
Oh, right. I think just one thing that comes to mind as we're talking now, my issue isn't with self-help at all, actually. I think I love people being focused on understanding humans and how we feel and how we act. And instructions are great. Guidelines are great. The issue I find, where it becomes a little bit more worrying, absolutism I'm not into, where it's if you don't do it this way, then something else. And equally, I personally wouldn't take advice off of somebody who hadn't had a sufficient experience within what it is they're talking about. And obviously with social media, like literally anybody can start guiding people. Like I was talking earlier about the podcast, I am shocked by the amount of single men and women who give out relationship advice online. It's like being...
What do you mean?
Honestly, it's like being taught how to swim by someone with armbands. Like I don't understand why I would, but it's because, you know, there's attention drawn to it, and I think a lot of what they say online comes from wounding because they aren't in these relationships. So yes, we can cut out people trying to give help about something they know nothing about. That's our responsibility as a society, to zone in on experts. Someone asked me the other day, like, how I feel talking about this stuff now. And I, for a long time, was in... Do you guys know about the Dunning-Kruger effect?
No.
There's a thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Does anyone else know about this? All right, well, it's like basically a graph. I'm trying to explain it. And like, you have confidence on one side and then competence along the bottom. 90% of the internet are people who are really confident but incompetent, right?
That's so good.
And actually politics too. So it's just that, right? Really confident, incompetent, because they're actually not smart enough, not competent enough to realize that they're stupid, yeah? So once you gain a little bit more competence, you fall into something called the valley of despair, which I don't know if all of us are there, but it feels like it, where it's like smart enough to know that we don't know everything, which is a great starting point, but now we're like, what the fuck is everything? Like, what's going on? And then the dream is you do your 10,000 hours and you slowly reach an incline, and then you end up, if you're lucky, in guru state where you've done enough to actually comment on something from a place of confidence and experience. And I feel like, you know, there are some things now, having written the book, and done a lot of reading and research. Yeah, relationships, boys, young men, I'm somewhere on the upward curve. I'm far from it, but I feel like I can talk a little more. So that's why I've been more vocal now, you know, and I think it should come from that place of experience.
As someone so bright and so willing to grow and forever learning, which you are all of those things, and I always learn something every time I talk to you, even if it's just for 30 seconds, because you haven't got the time to talk to me. Joking.
Ouch.
Joking. He was walking the dog, he had to pick a turd up. But like, I do find like the brightest people in the world, Einstein, physicists, people who have literally proven something, and then their next job that they've taken on board is to disprove themselves or do everything they absolutely can to work out whether they are right or wrong. And I think it takes a really extreme level of intelligence to just be willing to be wrong, let alone to go out of your way to prove that you are, to put so much time and effort into working out if you are. Most people just, scarily, they take on an idea as an opinion without it ever being challenged. And when people exist in echo chambers, when is an idea that you have ever challenged which would enable it to become an opinion? You can't be challenged by someone who just agrees with you all the time. And it's really, do you know what's scary nowadays? It's just the fact that there's such a lack of willingness to have a conversation in a room full of people who may want to disagree with you, which is really important. If you can't disagree agreeably, you're in trouble, because you have to be able to sit with people who are not going to think the same. It's not your job to change everyone and to encourage everyone to think the same as you. And I think we're in a really, you know, you're talking about absolutism. It's fucking frightening. Like, if you don't do this, it's wrong. If you don't agree with me, you're not wrong. And I'm not necessarily right. We have different life experiences, and I'm just going based upon what I've learned up until this point. And I might think something completely fucking different next week, because I encounter someone who makes me think differently of something that I thought I was absolute about.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I think I try and check myself all the time to not be wrong and strong, because I think we can quickly fall into them habits, especially with the company we keep. If everyone has a similar mindset and living in an echo chamber and no one's challenging you from a real place, how do we grow? And I think I'm at a stage in my life where I kind of have selective hearing. Like, I hear what I want to hear from who I want to hear it from, because they have that life experience in that department. And I'll be like, yeah, I can listen to that from you, I can listen to that from you, and then I put it all together, and then I try and move forward with it. But I think... That's a critical thought. It's good. Yeah. I didn't even know that was what it was, but it's like what you said. I learn something different every time when I'm with both of you. And also, I just want to say, I feel like you're doing an incredible job in this conversation. Yeah,
100%.
You deserve your flowers, because a big round of applause for Claudia,
now
please.
Now that you've said that, I could admit that I have absolutely no idea what time it is. So I have no idea how long we've got. Pardon? Okay, good to know. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to. I'm desperately trying to look at this clock up here, but the shine is exactly on it. And, so I can't.
No. I think as well, just to talk about self-help as well, I think a big part of self-help is holding yourself accountable.
Yeah.
Like, knowing that you did mess up in that relationship. You was a bit toxic in that friendship group. You didn't really need to not respond to that message. And I think holding yourself accountable is really key, especially if you live by yourself.
Yeah.
Because there's no one there that's going to come and tell you. So I think having that self-reflection and self-analyzing allows you to grow as an individual, and then to not be wrong and strong all the time, because you blink and life passes by.
I mean, we spoke yesterday briefly about education and how important that is. And I wonder, do you think that we're doing, all of you, I suppose, do you think we're doing enough when it comes to the kind of action side of mental health, when it comes to young people and education specifically?
I think class plays a big role in things, especially in society, and geography and location, and like, because I used to go into schools a lot and talk. But I try to not do it anymore, because they're like, you should come and talk about mental health. It's like, okay, if I do it and I go to a place that's quite deprived, you open up a big part of a lot of people's hearts, and they're not equipped to deal with it. And then you got to leave. But then you go to some other schools and they've got a therapy dog, they've got an on-site therapist, they've got weekly counselors, and it's like geography, class, money, all of it, it all plays such a role in education that it sometimes puts me in a position where I'm like, I feel like I can't do anything but go online and do something, because it really hurts when young people tell you their stories, especially like I did a poetry workshop once, and I mean, I'm a self-proclaimed poet. Yeah, I just say I'm a poet.
You're a poet.
No, but I didn't study poetry. I actually studied construction at uni. So when I was doing this poetry workshop, and I was just like, yeah, you lot write whatever you want, and played some piano music in the back. And this young woman wrote a poem called The Postman, and about how the postman never comes to her house. And the postman was in reference to her dad. And then afterwards, when she was explaining what this meant to the whole class, people weren't empathetic enough to give her the love. And then I felt like she needs a lot of compassion in this moment, but the school's now not equipped to deal with this. So I can't answer your question.
Which is an answer in itself.
So yeah, I'm available for poetry workshops, basically.
I, as a disclaimer, I guess I'm not hands-on enough yet within the current school network. Hussain definitely is doing more in that space, but as a result of some of the talks I've done, I've been invited to school, so I have a better understanding. But I think ultimately there's no excuse as to why we can't start encouraging children to understand how they feel from as early as possible. It feels so counterproductive for that to be something that is touched upon once a week, maybe for an hour as a teenager. For me, the entire structure of school is flawed. Kids have the most energy they'll have in their whole life in their teens and have to sit down for 8 fucking hours a day.
Absolute madness.
And it's not for everybody, and also kids learn in different ways. But why, when every single human being on the planet, the definitive aspect of their existence will be maintaining intimate, close personal relationships, and there is absolutely no framework in which they can understand how they feel. The root of nearly every single issue in society is emotional dysregulation. That's it. If somebody knew how to not react to how they were feeling, most of the crimes wouldn't be committed. Like most of like the amount of unnecessary actions, would be greatly reduced. But why would anybody know? Why would somebody know that their feeling will pass if they breathe? That's where we're at. So yeah, I question that society because it's not conducive to harmony.
I would say immediately no from the perspective of a relatively new father, in that we're sending kids to school before they're even ready and before developmentally. When we understand this, right? This is not airy-fairy. They're not ready to sit down and be given instructions. They still don't learn by way of verbal instruction. They learn by example. What example are they getting from being told to sit down and put their hand up when they need to go to the toilet? And immediately, if a teacher is exhausted, so by way of their exhaustion, lazy, and there's a class of 32 kids, you've already got teachers branding kids naughty, poor listeners, ADHD, like diagnosis which may not even be given if it wasn't for the fact that they've been put in a situation that they really cannot handle and shouldn't be forced to. There are systems around the world where kids don't start school until they're 7. I think that's being brought back to 6 now. But it's because they understand that later on in life they don't go on to exhibit symptoms of anxiety or depression in the way that we do with our school system, because it's not built for the happiness or the development, the healthy development of children, which is crazy.
You said something really powerful as well earlier about people being able to have conversations and have difference in opinion doesn't exist anymore. Like, can I ask him a question? How do you think we get that back? See, I just actually did what the school system made me do. I asked you if I could ask him a question. But I'm also being respectful. I don't know if I'm institutionalized.
Tolerance.
Maybe
tolerance.
Yeah.
Tolerance and encouraging listening.
But that is, again, the reason as to why we're not able to engage in debate like we used to is because, again, of a lack of awareness of our own emotional states. Like, ultimately the reason as to why people cut off or close their hearts is because they have identified with a concept. We don't have to identify with concepts. It's quite overwhelming to even contemplate that because of the world we live in, right? That's a lot. But we can exist in a space where we realize that somebody might not agree with what we're agreeing with, and ourselves, our spirit, isn't rooted in an idea outside of us. You know what I mean?
I was just going to say, it's also not rooted in being right.
No, it's not rooted in being right. Morality, subject. I mean, so I think, again, understanding how we feel is really important. Also, if we're going to speak specifically about men, there's a woman called Alice Evans who has a Substack She does incredible work around gender relations. She just delivers, again, cross-culturally, like globally, information about how gender is evolving and changing. And she just put up a post the other day where she was speaking about AI. And actually, we're going through a transitionary time where this new generation of men are going to lose a massive amount of jobs. And actually, women have begun to out-earn men because they have, through much of the development in the last 40 years, become adaptive. Not only can they be prominent in workforces that they weren't allowed in before, but they have this socially conditioned or encouraged and also spiritually bound kind of nurturance. We as men have a responsibility to nurture that part of ourselves. That's not a non-manly thing to have paternity, not just to your own child, but to the whole world around you, And then now look, if you want to look at it through a capitalist lens, men are going to suffer because of that. They can't adapt into emotionally orientated, nurturance-orientated jobs that AI can't take. So it's beneficial for everybody to fucking learn how to feel.
Fucking learn how to feel is a good quote. I'm being told that we have to wrap up in a second, so I've got one more question just for all of you. You mentioned, Hussain, actually, how people need to be cared for when they've been vulnerable. And I wonder how all of you look after yourselves, because you put so much of yourselves out in the world and you talk about these things, and they are difficult and they're not easy. And as you've all said tonight, some days it's easier than other times. I wonder how you all look after yourselves.
Yeah. I go to spin classes.
Yeah.
I sit at the front. I actually turned. I don't know if anyone goes spin. Anyone go spin? Yeah.
Spin's deep, bro.
Yeah, I know. And
Especially when they walk up to your bike and they're like, "Yeah, I'm gonna make that harder."
You gotta turn up.
Do you do prayer and stuff at the end of your one, or is that just my one?
No, there was no prayer in this one.
Sorry.
But
You got Soul Cycle,
it does get
Soul Cycle, is that different?
Soul Cycle is lovely. It's too expensive though. But I love spin. I love going spin classes. It makes me move.
Yeah.
And I think physical fitness. My friend Freddie's here. He's been such a great motivator and encourager for me. This is a funny story. I'll tell it quick. I don't run. Freddie runs a lot. Freddie, give us a wave. Is he even in there?
There he is.
Oh, he's there. Yeah. Freddie runs a lot. So I'm hanging out with Freddie. You are the company you keep. All of that. So he starts running, and he does the marathon. And he tells his friends and everyone, and they're proper encouraging, like, "Oh, that's so good." And I start running, and I didn't run a marathon. I ran a half marathon, and I told people in my life, and they were like, "The fuck you do that for?" And it was just mad to think that, no, it actually has such a endorphin release. Like, I feel like I'm freed, I'm outside, I'm feeling again. But so many people I grew up with would look at me and think, "What are you doing? What's wrong with you?" So fitness, poetry, of course, spin classes, and I think just being able to talk freely is the biggest one. Being able to just pick up the phone to someone you love. And there's not many people, probably less than a handful, maybe a handful, and that's enough, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Being able to be open and honest and just say how you feel, and then lay out there and then carry on with your day.
What about you guys?
By avoiding changing how I feel with negative things that we all too often descend into, it's really easy to make bad decisions when you feel bad. Easier said than done at times, and try to use positive things to change my state. So breathing exercises, recently Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which we want to talk about men, and an inability to be tactile. We've spoken before about not being raised to be tactile as men, and then you look at the fact that it's an 80-20 split male to female in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and it is the most intimate you can get with a man without having sex with them. It's and it's like loads of middle-aged men flocking to develop this ability to be tactile and in an intimate space with a man without it having to feel like anything that it isn't.
Yeah.
And I just think it's really just the pillars of health. It's sleep, exercise, and nutrition, and they're the hardest things to take care of when you don't feel great. But I would argue, to be honest, that unless you implement those three things and get those things in order, you shouldn't necessarily buy into the fact that you are depressed.
Yeah, just to back that up with Stephen, that is the very boring answer is during I did an emotional trauma retreat when I was younger. I was very lucky to, called The Bridge. One of the runners was Donna Lancaster, who does incredible work around emotional regulation. So I recommend people look her up. She's written a book called The Bridge, a book called wise words for women, which isn't actually specifically for women, but I guess it would sell more. I don't know. Women read more. I don't know. She told me it's not just for women. But she, on the bridge, you learn 6 tempos, which is sleep, nutrition, exercise, creativity, nature, and then community and solitude in equal measure. And whenever I'm a little bit off kilter, I'm yet to have looked at those 6 and been off kilter, because if they're all balanced, I'm good. Normally there's one thing missing and it's sending me. So those 6 pillars, which basically just says what you guys said, and I did a couple others, essential. For me, walking my 2 dogs, if I don't get to do that in the morning, I struggle. Walking is huge. I think like doctors maybe I'm making this up, I'm pretty sure doctors came out recently and said that a 20-minute walk a day was the most effective antidepressant, which people were a bit like...
I believe that, yeah.
I believe it.
Yeah.
Especially if it's before the hours of 9 a.m., before the hour of 9 a.m., and without your fucking sunglasses on.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So big thing for me, being in nature with my dogs. Yeah. So.
All right, so they're the lessons. Get out, do a 20-minute walk.
6
before.
tempos, yeah, man, for sure.
Well, thank you guys so much. Really, thank you. That was really brilliant. And